Hello, welcome to Bored and Confused, where I review shows based on two criteria. One, was I bored? Two, was I confused? Today's show is The Fear of 13, playing at the James Earl Jones Theater on Broadway. Now, before I get into this play based on a true story, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me grow this channel. Click that notification bell so you can see my new reviews when they come out. Every little bit helps and I really appreciate it. Okay, so let's get into this Fear of 13. There's another off-the-cuff review. So why don't we start at the beginning with, was I bored, was I confused, if that's what you want to know. This play, I was not confused, except there was one scene a little bit confused about that I'll get into, but I was bored. The play is one act, an hour and 50 minutes. It's based on a true story, and I did have some moments of boredom, but we'll get into that to a minute. So what did I know about the show going in? I knew nothing. I did not know that it was based on a true story. As I was watching it, I was asking myself, is this a true story? Because the things that were happening in the show just were so crazy that I was like, this must be true because it's stranger than fiction. What this story is about, it is an adaptation of a documentary called The Fear of 13, in which essentially this man, Nick Yarris, who was imprisoned for a murder and a rape he did not commit, and he was in prison for over 20 years. He was convicted on zero evidence, which is why watching this, having served on a jury, I was just thinking, how is this possible? I served on a jury where a guy was being accused of having possession of a weapon. And there were 3 eyewitnesses. He clearly was in possession of this weapon. To me, it was so obvious. But we could not convince all of the people because they were like, oh, their stories don't line up. And I'm like, yeah, that's how you know they're true. If they were exactly the same story, then they wouldn't be from 3 different people's perspective. Sometimes I think juries should only be made from playwrights or people who understand the human experience, because I found that these people weren't willing to accept anything unless there was video proof of it. And even now with AI, how are we ever going to have that? Okay, that was a tangent. But this was a different time. I think this took place around the 1970s, so maybe just a different time where they were just eager to put people in jail for crimes just so that people could be like, okay, that crime is solved. Who cares that there wasn't evidence? So playwright Lindsay Ferrantino, who you may remember this name from earlier in the season, she wrote the book for the musical Queen of Versailles, and she basically watched the documentary and felt that it was a play. She spent 2 or 3 years getting to know Nick better, and Nick Yarris is credited as a consultant on the production. It opened first at the Don Mar Warehouse in London with Adrien, Brody, who was already attached. It opened in October, November 2024, and it was directed by Justin Martin. Now it's transferring to Broadway with David Cromer as the director. And this marks both Adrien Brody and Tessa Thompson's Broadway premiere. Also, the title, The Fear of 13, I had no idea what it meant when I went into the play, and I had no idea what it meant when I left the play. I might have missed this at some point. There's a lot of talking and my mind was starting to wander, but this is based on the word trichophobia, which is the fear of number 13, and this is one of the words that Nick Yarris learned when he was in prison because he was doing a lot of reading. So what is the show about? Well, it's about Nick Yarris, this young man around, I think 21, was sentenced to death row for a murder and a rape that he didn't commit. And he spent more than 2 decades in prison. And during his time in prison, DNA testing was discovered, and he spent about 10 years of his time in prison just trying to get them to test the evidence for DNA so that he could prove that he didn't commit this crime. While he was in prison, he met this young woman named Jackie who was doing this work with the prisoners and talking to them. And she believed Nick and she wanted to help him. And through the course of her coming to see him and their correspondence, they fell in love and they even got married, even though they had never touched. And there's this beautiful scene in the play where they reach out and touch for the first time, and that's really the only connection they have in their marriage. In fact, there is one really, really beautiful scene that to me was the heart of the play that happens, gosh, more than halfway through. They face setback after setback in trying to get this DNA testing, and they try to stay hopeful, but after 10 years, Nick finally says that he has to let her go, that he is dragging her into prison with him because she's basically put her life on hold for him, and it doesn't seem that he's ever going to get out. This, to me, was the strongest moment of the play. And it's interesting because it's kind of mirrored earlier in the play. They tell us this story of a gay couple, of a man who gets sent to prison, and his lover starts committing crimes just so he would get thrown into prison as well. So I think the writer is drawing a parallel between those two relationships. Was it necessary? Probably not, but it was interesting. So let's start with some positives. I think the acting is very strong. Adrien, Brody, and Tessa Thompson are both great in this. They're both great actors. They're both emotionally truthful. Tessa Thompson was breaking my heart. So I loved them. I did have a technical issue with Adrien Brody. He's putting on this really thick, I guess it's Philadelphia or some kind of Pennsylvania accent of like a working class guy. And the issue is it felt like a textbook kind of accent. It didn't have the little idiosyncrasies that real people have in their dialects, and the sameness of it just was kind of flattening out his character for me. But at that same time, I still could see, because I was sitting very close, that he was really emotionally connected to this material. But I did get a little tired of that. And then afterwards, I watched a video to see what Nick Yarris sounded like, and he has a slight accent. But maybe the choice was to do a thick accent because, you know, Nick is probably 60 now, and when he was 20, maybe he did have a thicker accent. I don't know, but it didn't entirely work for me. But the emotional acting was really good. The set design to me was really a big surprise, because you walk in and it just feels like a black box, and then there's a line of doors and railing that it looks like a prison cell, like all these prison cells. And I thought, oh, we're going to just do a black box with just some chairs. But no, I was surprised. These big elaborate sets, this pawn shop comes in from the side, and then Jackie's apartment comes in from the side. And they also opened some of the doors in the back for some scenes. I thought David Cromer really surprised me, and I should say set design by Arnulfo Maldonado. Very interesting, clever set design. Although I did wonder, there was one scene that was held in the governor's office, and whereas the pawn shop, which was one short scene, got this huge elaborate set, for the governor's office, just a desk came on. So it was a little bit like, sometimes we're doing really elaborate sets and sometimes we're just indicating things with small set pieces. So some negatives. I just felt this show was hour and 50 was not necessary for this story, especially when you're telling a true story. I mean, we're used to hearing true crime dramas told in 20 to 40 minute segments on a podcast or an episode of TV, and I just felt like it was dragging it out. I really didn't get engaged with the play until he started talking about the crime, and then we went to his trial. Once we got to the trial, then trials are interesting because there's a clear goal, and is he going to be found guilty or innocent, and you want to know. And so the trial I found fascinating. The show begins just kind of showing how hard prison life is, and then it introduces us to this gay couple, and they're in this choir, and so there's singing, which I love the singing, and then we meet the character of Jackie, and she explains why she's in the prison, and she's interviewing different guys, and then she starts to interview Nick. But for a long time, Nick doesn't want to talk about what happened to him. So they're just talking about other stuff. And I guess we're showing their relationship develop, but it didn't need to take so long. I thought we could cut 20, 30 minutes off this play, no problem. So that was my issue. I also felt that when you're adapting a true story to the stage or to another medium, especially when you've got a documentary, you want to stay true to all the facts. Now, also, are they facts? Because Nick is recounting what happened to him. Look, when anyone recounts something, they're going to elaborate. I feel like you don't need to be crazy factual, because just the nature of storytelling goes against being really factual. But I think because he's alive, because there's a documentary out there, because there's a lot of podcasts and things about this show, she felt like she wanted to be really accurate with this. But to me, the accuracy and the specifics and the attention to detail just made the play feel not dramatic. It is an interesting story, but you got to make that story dramatic on the stage. And for my money, I would rather see a play where they take a grain of truth and then imagine a whole new world and expand on a character, and a playwright uses their imagination to make every moment exciting and interesting and dramatic. And that is my issue in general with these kinds of adaptations of true stories. They're not my favorite, especially not true crime stories. You know, it's interesting that I saw Kinrex, which I already posted that review, but I actually saw Kinrex the day before I saw The Fear of 13. So we just had a weekend of true crime dramas, Kinrex being from the opposite side, where it's someone who is a criminal who they can't arrest because he intimidates everyone, so the law is failing in that aspect. And then in this show, we've got a person who's been accused wrongly of a crime, and he's thrown in prison. And both of these stories were just pointing out how justice is not blind. The justice system is seriously flawed. And I think that's an important message that we can get across in plays, but I just wish we could do it in a more dramatic way. You know, I think of 12 Angry Men, which is doing the opposite of what these plays are doing. 12 Angry Men is all about, isn't the American justice system of 12 jurors, isn't it so smart how one person can sway an entire jury? And that play was written in the 50s, and it reflects the idealism of that period. Now we're watching these plays in current times, even though these stories are about things that happened 20, 30 years ago. But wow, how the times have changed, where we're not idealistic about the legal system here in the United States, and with good cause. So I think these plays, both Kinrex and The Fear of 13, are important plays to wake us up and say, justice is not blind. Money, apathy. I mean, this one, it's apathy. And this one's heartbreaking because it takes him 10 years to get the DNA test. And not because it can't be done, just because people don't have the will to do it. This guy's been on death row for 10 years. Why? It's a closed and shut case. Why do we care? Okay, I'm rambling, but that's what you love. But before I wrap this up, here's a spoiler alert. Spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you how the play ends. So this play is just going on, and Adrien Brody is talking at the end, and I'm just thinking, is he going to say something really profound that's really going to put a button on this? And I feel like the writer did not know how to finish this play. So there's a cheap gimmick at the end of the play. They talked about his dog earlier on, and so a dog comes on stage at the end of the play. The audience all cooed, and I just was like, what? I don't care about the dog. So to me, it was just a non-ending, and I did not like the ending of this play. Okay, let's wrap this up. Was I bored? Was I confused? Yes, I was bored for the first half of the play, because I just was waiting to get to his story about what happened to him and why he was in prison, instead of wallowing in, it's hard being in prison and their slow-growing romance, very slow-growing romance. And then once he had let her go, and I'd had that beautiful scene, then he goes into like a 20-minute monologue that just, I was like, wrap it up. And then we end with that kind of cheap ending. At least I thought it was cheap, or non-ending. You know, there was something I wish he would have said. And here, again, she's trying to be true to the actual Nick Yarris. But as an audience member watching this play, what I wanted him to say at the end, whether it's true or not, just to give me something positive, because this was so negative. The whole show is so dark and negative. Literally, the set is black. It's just heavy and dark and negative, and made me very sad. I wanted him to say, I was a troubled teen. He was stealing cars, he was committing crimes. That's why he ended up in custody in the first place. And I wanted him to say, it was a good thing that I was in prison. It was wrong that I was there, but it was good for me because I needed some structure in my life. I needed to be taken out of this bad trajectory I was on. And by being in prison, I learned what was important. I found love. Even though it wasn't lasting, I did find love, and I learned what was important in life. And he kind of does this, but it just, I didn't leave with that monologue. I didn't have any hope. I just felt like this man has been failed. Many other like him have been failed. What can we do about this? I'm so depressed. So was I confused? I wasn't confused, but there's one scene where he's like 9 years old, and they referred to it before something happened in the woods. And at the end, they kind of show us what happened, but they don't really show us. So there's a guy smoking, and then he says something to this young boy I think his bike is broken, and it seemed like a sexual innuendo, but I didn't really understand what happened. What I think happened is that he was sexually assaulted or forced to perform a sexual act against his will. I didn't really understand who this guy was that was smoking the cigarette. I don't know if it was someone he knew or if it was just some stranger. So I was confused by that. And then I think that moment was important to know because they kind of use it as a get out of jail free card. Although, wouldn't that have been nice in real life because he really needed a get out of jail free card. But to kind of say that he is a good person, but this one thing that happened to him when he was 9 years old sent him on this path of crime. And yes, this is very traumatic and it's heartbreaking to see that. But drawing the connection between the assault and his stealing cars and kind of just being a crazy teenager, I don't know. He might have been a crazy teenager anyhow. And it felt a little bit like he was just trying to pin all of his problems on this awful thing that happened to him that I'm sure was damaging to him. But I don't know. That confused me and I didn't really buy it. So let me wrap this up. The acting is great. The emotional truthness of the acting is great. Tessa Thompson especially, I enjoyed. Adrien Brody is really good. It was great to see him close up. I was sitting so close that every time he turned to downstage, he slapped me in the face with his nose. That's a terrible joke. I shouldn't have said that. But I was on the second row. And the reason I was on the second row is because I did a rush ticket day of box office, just sauntered in there. There's maybe one person in front of me, grabbed a $45 ticket. I was on the second row, could not ask for anything better. If you like these actors and you want to see them close up, I do think it is worth the $45 ticket. So yeah, these are stars. These are their Broadway debuts. They're good actors. It's well directed, but be forewarned that it does require patience, especially the first part of this show to really go with it. You have to relax into it and just go with the story. And I think it may help if you know that it's a true story, although I figured that out pretty quick. But just so that so you're not expecting a lot of drama. That's terrible to say. Anyhow, if you have to choose between Ken Rex and The Fear of 13, I would actually choose Ken Rex because I think that writer-actor found a more interesting way to make the show dramatic, and the incorporation of the music was really cool in that show. So, but if you want to see both, do that. So $45 rush tickets day of at the box office, and then you can also get $45 rush tickets online at the Telecharge website. Thank you for watching this review, and my next one will be my last Broadway show of this season is going to be the Rocky Horror Show. So hopefully I will get a ticket to it soon because I haven't scored one yet, but I'm going to try to get one of those $30 rush tickets. Save me some money. All right, see you in the next one. Bye.
Don't wanna drift away, wanna stay inside the play. Keep me engaged, keep me amused with what's in front of me. 'Cause I don't wanna be bored and confused.